She's very generous to the Port Jackson Talks. And Anna is going to lead our discussion tonight on where do profits come from, an introduction to surplus value. So thank you, Anna.
Thank you, Comrade Hannah. Firstly, I too would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land we're on and to pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. This land always has been and always will be Aboriginal land. If I may just, before I get on to this topic, say that the comrades I've spoken to who were there today when it was dispersed said that the police used a new tactic, and that was they dispersed the crowd and then they followed. Each person who dispersed was followed by a policeman. They sort of stalked them and then came up and arrested them. And so I don't know how many ended up with fines or anything more about it, but there was that new tactic, which is interesting. Not very healthy, but again, reinforcing the fact they'd really planned how to deal with it. So I'll come now to the question that I'm talking on tonight, and it is a brief introduction. That's all you can do in this time. It's a huge topic and a very important one. In fact, it goes to the whole essence of capitalism. And capitalism is a socio-economic system based on private ownership of the means of production and private appropriation of what's produced by workers. And profits, private profits, are the driving force of capitalists and capitalism. And that's what we're looking at tonight, these profits. And if you look at any company report, you'll see that in their objectives or priorities, there will be mention of increasing shareholder assets, increasing value that's created or added in production, maximising return to shareholders, and growth. They always talk about growth and they want to be the biggest, largest in the world. Now, Marx studied commodity production and he defined commodity as a product of labour designed for exchange. And by exchange, I mean selling and then purchasing. If something is not sold and purchased, it's not technically a commodity. So I want to take an example. Say Dennis bakes a cake, brings it along to a branch meeting, generously cuts it up and gives everyone a helping. That is not a commodity. The cake is not a commodity. If Dennis bakes a cake and it's sold and he hopes at a profit, he's a capitalist, then it becomes a commodity. If it's not sold, it's not a commodity. So in Marxism, there's a number of terms that are in common usage that have a technical meaning in Marxist theory. And commodity is one of them, and we'll come to another one shortly. So companies buy and sell commodities. They have commodities that go into their production, various materials, etc. And they sell those commodities or services. Workers are paid a wage. And just putting wage theft aside for a minute, the wage is a set amount, normally, per hour, per annum, or with piecework, it's according to the number of whatevers that are sewn, etc. Working conditions are usually set, and in Australia, that's by awards, by enterprise agreements, and the National Employment Standards. excuse me, excuse me, my voice is husky. And that all sounds fair enough. You hear the term a fair day's wage for a fair day's work. But in fact, under capitalism, that's not what really is happening. The reality is disguised by that wages system. And that was one of Marx's greatest achievements, to expose the nature of this deception. And I want to look at how this arises. A company has costs of production, has inputs, machinery, raw materials. It may purchase component parts. It has rental possibly. It has all its communications, its electricity. It may be spending money on interest from borrowings to the bank. And of course, it pays for labour, for the wages. And when it sells these commodities, it expects to make a profit. And that profit is the difference between all the input costs and what they get paid for that product. And if they are paid, if the profit is positive, if they get more money than it costs them, that's great. They go on getting bigger and better. If, however, it's the opposite, and their profit, they don't make a profit, instead they make a loss because their costs of production cost more than what they sell it for, and they make a loss, and they'll soon give up and go away unless they can get more money for those commodities. And these commodities have what Marx called an exchange value, and that's reflected in the price at which they're sold. And we know that if the cost, oh, sorry, I've just said that. Profit is often referred to as value added. So you've got the value of all the inputs, and then there's this other value that's added when they sell it. So if something costs them $100 to make and they sold it for $120, the value added in production is $20. And that's their profit. And the big question that Marx asked is, well, where does that profit come from? Where does that surplus value, as he called it, come from? And I'll give you a quote from an article in Financial Review, which described Gina Rinehart as having, and I quote, tremendous talent in wealth creation, end of quote. And if you read some company reports, and I love company reports, as some comrades would know, sometimes they talk about the company making so many billion or 100 million profits. The company did it. Gina did it. She's a genius. But is that correct? How is that value added? Could it have been done by the machinery? No. Did the boss do it? No. The value added in production was added by the hard work of workers, by their labour. And this surplus value is what Marx looked into. Marx showed that workers are not paid the full value of their labour, of the work they do, that their wages are less than the value they create for employers. And Marx called that exploitation. And again, exploitation is a scientific term. It's it really means that workers are not paid the full value of their work. And labour power is the term used, and it's different to labour. It's the capacity of a worker's mental, physical skills, experience, which are exercised in production. And Marx identified the process by which workers are exploited and devised a means of measuring the degree of exploitation. And what he did was take the ratio of the surplus value to the wages expressed as a percentage. I'm sorry this is not done in a classroom with handouts and whiteboard. I don't know if it's becoming difficult to understand. But say, for example, products are sold for 100, whatever, and it costs 50 to produce. So the profit's 50. The surplus value is 50. So 50 for wages, 50 surplus value. So you divide the surplus value by wages, multiply by 100, and you get 100%, the rate of exploitation. Now, capitalists seek to maximise that rate of exploitation. And it's interesting to note that previously in the textile, footwear and so on industry, before it was all dismantled, that rate of exploitation, according to my calculations back in the early 80s, was around 100%. But, and that's the case for a number of other industries that had what capitalists would call a low rate of exploitation. They want to make a lot more bucks than the same as they pay workers. They want to make 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 times that. And so the rate of exploitation also varies between different companies as well as different industries. A lot depends on the technology. And quite often you'll hear trade union officials saying, oh, these workers are highly exploited. And they'll say it because they're on a low wage. Now, that might be true. It might not be true. It depends on the amount of surplus value measured against the wage. So a worker in the mining sector on $150,000 might be more highly exploited than a worker on the minimum wage. So if I sum that bit up about exploitation, and I hope I haven't succeeded in confusing everybody, exploitation as used by Marx is a technical term. It's not determined by what a worker is paid, but by the amount they produce over and above the surplus value, rather, what they produce over and above what they're paid. I'll say that again. It's determined by the surplus value compared with what they're paid, or the amount they're paid compared with the total selling price. Labour power, which I referred to before, and that's the capacity of a worker, their various skills, education, etc. Labour power is actually a commodity. It's bought and sold on markets. And Marx compared it with other commodities. Its price like other commodities, rises and falls depending on demand and the levels of unemployment, but particularly levels of unemployment, and trade unions have to battle. So look, I've just given you another quote from Wage, Labour and Capital by Karl Marx. Wages are only a special name for the price of this peculiar commodity, which has no repository than human flesh and blood. So comes the question, what is the value of the capacity to work? The worker's labour power, that is, purchased by an employer. It can only be the value of the goods and services consumed by the worker and their dependents, and which produces and reproduces the worker's capacity to work and future workers, that is, their children, and which is therefore approximately equal to the value of the worker's wage, approximately. The value of a commodity is measured by the amount of society's labour time which goes into producing it. In other words, what went into producing the worker, including the production of the inputs. Now, there's a secret in here revealed by Marx. As I said, labour power differs from other commodities in that when it's sold by the worker, bought by the capitalist, it differs from other commodities in that the process of it being used, it creates a value greater than its own. Other commodities can't. That value is retained in production and so forth, or it might even depreciate. And it's that value that increases in the process of workers' labour that is the source of the surplus value. That is how wealth is created. That's where its profits come from the unpaid labour of workers. So I want to now just read to you a quote from Marx's Wages, Prices and Profit, I think it was. I haven't got it in front of me anymore. And I think this is extremely important, particularly for any trade unionists amongst you. He said, a general rise in the rate of wages would result in a fall of the general rate of profit, but, broadly speaking, not affect the prices of commodities. In fact, wage rises do not cause price rises. That's a piece of mythology, capitalist mythology, an excuse to keep wages down. The general, and I'll quote again, the general tendency of capitalist production is not to raise, but to sink the average standard of wages. And I'll continue. Trade unions work well as centres of resistance against the encroachments of capital. They fail partially from an injudicious use of their power. They fail generally from limiting themselves to a guerrilla war against the effects of the existing system. Instead of simultaneously trying to change it, instead of using their organised forces as a lever for the final emancipation of the working class, that is to say, the ultimate abolition of the wages system. And that really, I think, goes to the heart of the question for us as revolutionaries and for work in the trade unions, that we are seeking to change the system, that we want to end the present wages system that exists under capitalism. Now, I want to return to my cake to conclude, okay? Except this cake is the economy, the amount of wealth produced in a year, gross domestic product. It gets carved up between capitalists and workers. After all, it's a result of the labour of workers. And if workers get a larger share of the cake through winning wage rises, employers get a smaller share, and vice versa. If employers get a larger share, workers get a smaller share. Now that leads to an ongoing struggle, and it's the class struggle. It's the economic struggle between labour and capital. And that cannot be extinguished. Even if unions go along a class collaborationist path and cooperate with employers, employers just go on taking more and more, a bigger and bigger share of the cake. Now, one of the things that probably you could do is maybe have a discussion at some stage in your branch or wherever, and that is discuss the various methods that employers use and trade unions and workers use in the struggle to get a bigger share of that cake. Thank you. You're on mute.
Thank you, Comrade Anna. Let's start with any questions maybe that comrades have. Any comrade got a question about Comrade Anna's report? Whoa, no questions.
Not sure what that
Okay,
means.
I'll ask a question if that helps. Shall I ask a question?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, what's different under socialism?
Under socialism, workers still work for companies or establishments or firms or whatever. And there is usually a profit which is paid either, it might be used by their trade unions, it might be used by the government. The government in the former socialist countries used to take a certain percentage of income to use for social expenditure, like free health services, subsidised public transport, subsidised housing, running the government, etc., everything that the state provided, and it was extensive. And I think when I was in Bulgaria, they said it was around 25% they took, and the rest would go to workers. So, and it's a good question, because one of the things that happened was that over time, workers became alienated in the process of production in many instances. I think initially workers had a lot of say. The enterprises were run democratically and so on. But my feeling is that later there were issues in the sense that they hadn't overcome that problem of alienation, which is something socialism has to deal with in its initial stages. I don't know if that's a good enough answer, or other comrades have got better answers.
Who'd like to comment on that or ask another question?
I'd like to ask a question. I have a lot of trouble really understanding the whole concept of surplus value because I tend to think if you're counting the cost of all the materials that go into the production of a commodity, including wages, and then you can sell it, you know, say again, like cost $100 and you're managing to sell it for 120. The purchaser is the one who is paying that extra $20 on top of everything. Now, if for some reason the purchaser can't afford to pay that and the businessman drops his profit a bit, he's still got to pay the same cost for the material goods and the wages. I just can't work out why the wages are counted as a different sort of cost to the production as the cost of materials.
Right. Well, firstly, if they can't sell it at a profit, I think I said before, they basically have to borrow money and restructure and sack workers and all those sort of things, or they go belly up out of business. That's fairly simple in terms of if they can't make a profit. But the reason that workers' are different to other costs is that the other costs, that their value remains static. If you use some iron ore in production of steel, the electricity goes in, etc., etc. The production process, those things within that production process do not make it worth more. Without the labour of workers, those things don't do anything. The iron ore sits there, the machinery sits there idle. So it's only through the labour of workers that you get that surplus value. And so Marx was able to answer that question, Sylvia, by saying, well, yes, labour power, the capacity of workers to labour is a commodity, but he identified it as a different commodity, different to the others, a different sort, apart from being flesh and bones and things. It created more value than its own value initially, a higher value. I don't know, is that becoming any clearer or?
Yeah, I find it, the difference between a cost of something and the value of something, those two words I find difficult to come. I'm thinking like workers are often have a ceiling on how much they are paid, you know, that's decided by the courts, etc. But there's never a ceiling on the profits. Whatever he can get, the manufacturer will get it. If people can't afford it, he gets less. But there's no ceiling put on the amount of profit he can get, and I think that's unfair. But
well, it's not so much that there's a ceiling or no ceiling. Like companies can charge what they like for, say, iron ore. But if they charge beyond the market rate, and there's not then they won't sell. But they can whack the price up if there's a shortage. And the company purchasing it has to weigh out whether or not it can make a profit with it at that price. Where in wages, there's no cap on wages. There's nothing that says you can't pay a worker $1 million. It's just that employers won't give them the job. They'll give someone else the job at a fraction of that. And how much they receive really depends on their bargaining power. And when unemployment is very high, workers have less bargaining power. And what we're seeing, for example, at the moment with COVID and the fact that there's almost 1 million people on unemployment benefits, and there's probably going to be closer to 1.5 or whatever soon, that creates a large pool of reserve labour, as Mark's called it. And employers can say to workers, well, if you're not happy with what I'm offering, off you go. There's plenty out there who will take it because they're desperate. And that's one of the reasons why the government keeps unemployment benefits so low. It makes people desperate for any work, for anything, under any conditions. Am I answering your question, Sylvia, or am I not understanding it?
Sylvia, did you want to comment, or can we go on to another comrade? Sylvia, you're muted, darling. Unmute. All right. It's Comrade Don.
Yeah.
Had his hand up. Unmute, Don.
Oh, maybe I can. Maybe
Yeah.
I'm.
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can now.
Thank you, Anna. That was marvellous. I really enjoyed that article. I want you to explain to me, I mean, I believe everything you said, number one, but that's a very bad debater's technique, isn't it? But
that's one of those things where, well, that was great, but...
yeah, well, that's what I'm going to say. Explain to me, I realise that my wages don't increase the cost of anything because capitalism has no real high-end cost. It's whatever you can get. Yeah, that's the bottom line with that. It's Norman Lindsay said it was theft, and so I agree with that.
Yeah.
But how wages don't affect price of things?
Well, that's probably really almost the subject of another talk, but if you go back and have a look at the past and look, for example, when at points when wages, say, have been very flat, take the price of oil, for example. Oil has been up to record highs in the 1970s when there was the OPEC crisis and oil prices were extremely high. Workers' wages didn't go up.
No.
And there's numerous examples historically where wages might have gone up, but prices didn't go up rather. There's a lot of other factors at play in determining these things. There's monopoly pricing, cartels, there's all sorts of external economic factors that affect companies. Because if the cost of oil goes up, then the cost of production goes up. And that's got nothing to do with wages. I mean, that's just one example. And if, for example, you've got monopoly pricing by multinationals, transnationals, they then can put the price as high as the market will bear it.
Yeah.
And they don't pay workers an extra beam.
Yeah.
So that's just a couple of examples. And I know we're going through a period at the moment where wages have been going down, but I'll tell you what, when I got my grocery delivery today, I didn't notice any price reductions.
No.
You know, an employer will say, oh, if you increase your wages, I'll have to put my prices up. Well, they might try that on. And if the market will bear it, they'll get away with it. But they didn't have to. What higher wages do is reduce the share of the cake the amount of profits that employers make. But I think the question is a really important one, because I think a lot of people, including the ACTU, accept this employer mythology. And the accord back in the 80s between the ACTU and the Labor Party was based on the premise of reducing wages or keeping them flat so as to increase profits, claiming that that would lead to investment and jobs. And what it did do was lead to investment in new technology, getting rid of jobs, and offshore.
I'm sorry, I meant to unmute myself to answer your question, and I got completely cut right off. I could hear everything, but I couldn't get back on, and I'm not terribly au fait with how you use these things, but I'm thinking now. Yes, it is explaining, but I can see it's a very, very complex subject. I find this the hardest part of Marx's work, is understanding the complexity of the whole setup of wages.
Yeah. There's quite a lot of terminology, Sylvia, and I think it's hard to present it to you this way. You know, in the past when I've taught about surplus value and exploitation, I've had worksheets, I've done stuff on a board and given people some of Marx's definitions and things, and I've spent 2 or 3 hours going through it. So as I warned at the beginning, it was, I probably tried to cover too much in the time, but it's an overview which maybe can set you reading. The ABC books we have in the party office, the series, there's one on surplus value, and that's written very clearly and in very simple English.
Okay. Ahmed and then Dennis.
Good evening, comrades. I just want to know about this Reinhardt, Gina Reinhardt.
Yes.
You mentioned that she is smart for, becoming rich or gaining money or whatsoever. Not because she's working, because it is from surplus value and exploitation of workers, etc., etc.
Yeah.
First of all, she became rich because of her father.
That's right.
She inherited her father's wealth.
Yeah, yeah. That was a quote from the Financial Review that I read you.
But what I want to emphasize on, even her father became rich because selling Australian mines, Australian earth, Australian whatsoever, He was not born with the money.
No.
He just stole the Aboriginal lands. I don't know how did he become maybe friend with the top, with the
banks.
What do you call it? Those who are, we cannot see them, they are underground or whatever they call them, underground estate or, shade estate, whatever the name is. How can somebody just not an Aboriginal race or whatsoever comes here and then declare the land and take it and sell it and become rich, and then the inheritance claim the wage here in Australia is too high. We have to pay the workers like Africa.
Yeah.
You have to give them 50 cents per day, not at 18 hours or 20 hours per day. That is why I don't believe that she's smart. She become what they say, the fascist is the decay capitalist, and capitalist is only after interest and not nothing in the favor of working class at all. So that's how the wealth has accumulated.
Yeah,
it's based on the exploitation, not 100%. I don't know, not only for the workers but also selling the Aboriginal lands, Aboriginal coals, aboriginal natural resources to whatsoever. Otherwise, she did not born with that wealth, even her father. So that's what I wanted to bring.
It's true.
Final things, another surplus is the perspiration of working class, you know, and depends which country. Some get 100% exploitation, some more than that. The wage at the moment, the wage in Iranian workers is 1/5 of the, for instance, Turkey. They get $80 to $100 per month. Imagine how the exploitation is there. That is all going from the International Monetary Fund and World Bank, which are imposing their will on the third world countries to tell them how you have to run your country. That's it, Comrade.
Thank you. Yep.
Thank you, Comrade Ahmed. Comrade Dennis had his hand up.
Annie, thanks for your talk. You said that if something didn't sell, it wasn't a commodity. So that if you take a company like Coles and they're throwing out pizzas that have been prepared and they're past their use-by dates, so they're not commodities. Does that affect their bottom line, or?
No, it's a bit more complex than that, because pizzas are manufactured by a company, right? So in that process, workers are exploited, and there's surplus value for that company that's making the pizzas. When Coles buys them, if it can't sell them, it loses money on them. But in regard to Coles and the retail sector is a bit different. In regard to Coles, if it can't sell them, it's losing money. But it doesn't detract from the fact that they were a commodity when Coles bought them.
Oh, I see. Okay, thanks.
But there's still surplus value embodied in them. Yeah, I mean, I don't feel an expert to comment on retail. I think workers in the retail sector are, in a sense, exploited. They're proletarianized, but they're not workers in the same sense as workers in production. The same with distribution. It's a bit different. But I don't feel I can explain it in more detail off the top of my head.
Can I add something to it?
Yeah.
Can I just make a point, please, Comrade Ahmed? Dennis, I think when you say if it's not sold, it's no longer a commodity, it doesn't mean that its existence as a commodity just kind of goes into thin air. What it means is that in a commodity, there is a use value, what it can be used for, and there is an exchange value, what it can be sold for. Those are both aspects of a commodity. And if a commodity isn't sold, then its use value is not used. It sort of atrophies, if you like. Its exchange value is still sitting there as a potential, but it's not being used because it isn't being sold. You know, so when Anna says it's no longer a commodity in a sense is a sort of active thing, which is being used, which is being exchanged or sold. You know, and if it isn't sold, you know, it may well, you know, as a thing, it may well get thrown on the rubbish heap or put in the rubbish dump or whatever. You know, so its use value is gone entirely and its exchange value goes. But those potentials for use and for exchange value within a commodity are there until it's actually destroyed.
Right, thanks.
Would you agree with that,
Yeah, no, Hannah, you said it a lot better than I could. Yeah, thank you.
Very hard to know the real price of anything.
No, it isn't actually. It isn't. The real price, as Anna has said, is the cost of the raw materials and the value of the labor that the worker puts in to transform those raw materials into a commodity, which has a use and an exchange value, right? Now, the value of the worker's labor power is never fully refunded by the employer. The difference between the value of their labor power in creating a commodity and what they are actually paid in wages is what we call the surplus value, which is profit. Now, that profit will depend on how much the owner thinks he can screw out of the market.
That's right. But the thing is, it's nearly impossible for the average person to find out the real price of any item. For example, I went to Harvey Norman to buy a refrigerator. It was $2,000, $1,999.
Ooh.
And I said, well, you know, I said, this is a big commercial refrigerator. Okay, so I want to buy, what if I want a discount? Oh, we can give you $500 off if you buy it today. Okay, so what if I buy it next week? Can I get $500? Well, buy today, you'll get the same thing for $1,500. So what's the real price of that machine? How would I know? And my wages didn't influence it at all. Just by asking, may I have a discount? That's a hypothetical, by the way, but it happens all the time.
Yeah, but
retail, I know
what you're dealing with is the owners of the commodities playing with the amount of surplus value they have available.
Yeah.
Now, say they are not selling very well. They may sell some in which at lower prices to encourage sales. You know, you put on a sale, you sell things. So the amount of surplus value that you keep as a profit will be very low. But if the commodity is in demand, then in fact you get what we had in a number of countries with masks. You know, the prices shot up because they were in demand. So there was some surplus value, but that was massively, if you like, sort of increased almost by the fact that there was this demand. And so the employer, the owners of the commodity, decided, oh yeah, we can charge much more because people are desperate for this to stay alive.
That's what I was trying to say. There's no real price. There's no high price. There's no real high price. It's whatever you can get, as you said.
It's what you can get. Dog is dog. Yeah.
Nicole, did you have your hand up then, or? Yeah, okay, go for it.
Hi everyone. Really great speech. Really great talk, Anna, actually, by the way, on surplus value. I just wanted to comment on what Dennis was saying about retail workers and pizzas and that sort of discussion. I tend to think that Marx is a very, very good base point to talk about Marxian thought in general, and socialism in general. But I think because of the context Marx was in terms of the services sector, it's hard to talk about surplus value, especially in services. But I think a really interesting thought about retail workers, phone call centers, those sort of services where the commodity isn't anything physical or has been created in production. It's actually the actual worker is the surplus value. So when we start thinking about as a use case for basic surplus value, a lot of people like Cornel West and Zizek, which are people I really like to listen to, they tend to think about, say, someone in a call center in a country that isn't as developed as some of the imperialist first world countries that people are accessing those services from. Mm-hmm. That could just be, say, you know, paying your phone bill and having an argument with someone from another country, say like India or Singapore. and the surplus value is actually created by you having an extra, God knows how much money on your bill, and that surplus value is created based on someone having to do processes for you, having to do work for you. And it goes, I don't know if I'm explaining it that well, but it goes into a lot of things. It's a big thing that I know some people in Solidarity have talked about, where they can create need. So there's, in terms of capitalist production, there's marketing, which actually, instead of the traditional Marx thought of saying capitalism creates efficiencies by investing in commodities over and over with other commodities, it can create a commodity through marketing, through services to actually provide goods where you don't have to work for them or even access them. They'll do it for you. I don't know if I'm explaining it that well, but just a thought about how surplus value, or a little thinking stage of how surplus value can be actually not a commodity, but the worker in of itself is thought of as a commodity. Yeah. It's not really covered that well in, like, say, Capital, but there's a few good places to jump off of. I linked something in the Zoom group chat about Imperial's thoughts on socialism, especially in economic sense, just because we tend to think of production in commodities, which is very useful, by the way, but a lot of use cases can also be that we actually extract manpower from other countries where the wages are simply just much lower than even ours, and the surplus value is from the fact that we can pay them much less. And even though we do that here, it's very exaggerated in that circumstance. So just a good thinking exercise.
Anna, were you going to?
Yeah, I'm not sure if I quite understood what you were saying, but if I can go back a step, workers sell their labour power, not their labour per hour, but labour power, their capacity to work. And you're a particular worker, you've got all these skills, education, experience, and that's what you sell. And the employer buys that at roughly, give or take, up and down, the market value for that labour power. And it varies, of course, depending on trade unions and other things. Then the employer seeks to exploit that labour power to the maximum, to get out of that labour power the value of more labour than they've paid for. And that's the surplus value. And they can increase that by extending the working day. They can increase it by reducing manning levels, etc., etc. Now, that to me is how I understand what Marx says about surplus value.
Yes.
And I think Volume 1 of Capital actually goes into a lot of detail about that. And I didn't come to quite the same conclusion as you on that. I think that's sort of almost Bible.
I think for me it's more like, I do think Volume 1 was really good, and Volume 3 talked about a lot of boom and bust and how things will eventually go in a downward trend. I think more, I'm thinking that especially in our economy where we have tended to automate a lot of things, and a lot of things are especially nowadays non-physical. So your retail workers, your service centers, that in a way we need to start thinking sometimes about commodities, how do I say, not exactly in a physical way, like the pizza where we get, dough and we put it into a factory and we apply production into it. The actual production can sometimes, the actual commodity, can be someone putting into work into collating someone's phone bill, or trying to figure out I'm trying to find a lack of examples. I guess what I'm trying to say is that especially in our society nowadays, there's a lot of non-physical commodities that have a lot of production labor value applied to them, and we still extract the same surplus value. And with retail workers, I haven't been a retail worker for a while, but although they're not exactly creating an object, they're almost like a form of like almost marketing, and that is a labor. Sorry.
Well, marketing is an input into the costs, but in extracting the labor for that marketing, they're making surplus value as well. They're exploiting that worker that does the marketing. Now, the service sector, which is now something like 70 or more % of the Australian economy, as you say, they're intangible commodities. You can't pick up and hold something like the internet or, telecommunications. Now, health service, for example, is commodified in private hospitals, where they're trying to make a profit. The same thing now, housing has become commodified with the way in which it's bought and sold at profit. Now, it's more complex because you have to go back to the beginning where construction took place, and whoever had the construction done for them pays more than the labour. So the company building it gets profit, surplus value, and so on. It gets more complicated. I steered away deliberately from the services sector because these are not tangible things you can hold.
I'm finding it like hard to talk about as well, because it's hard to talk about almost something that doesn't exist.
Well, it exists. The services exist in a but non-concrete form that you can grab. It's a bit like, if you're teaching in a private school and it's making a profit, then again, surplus value, you're talking about capitalism. And in America, there's a lot of corporatization of education, and schools are private, for profit. Our friend Bill Gates is one of these proponents of privatizing everything. I think you're raising a very important point, and totally agree that services, the exploitation takes place in the provision of services. And there's layers of exploitation in something that's more complex than, say, digging potatoes out of the ground and just standing there and selling them to the public or something, getting someone to sell them and paying them.
Dorothy, in the chat, you raised the question of services. Did you want to comment here at all?
No, I think Anna's handling it, and Anna's answering it in those terms. I just thought when Nicole was grappling for language, that what she may have been talking about was services, the service industry.
Yeah.
And so I was just trying to suggest that form of language so that we could understand the concept. Okay. But I think, this goes very much to the heart about the changing nature of classes in capitalist countries. We have that traditional idea of manufacturing and the things that were created by the working class, and there's a tendency not to accept that other sectors which are developing in modern capitalism are also exploited in the same way, and they are part of the working class. And I think that goes to Nicole's what Nicole is raising, like, for example, in IT and technology, there's a whole new section of the workforce who are being exploited in the same way. Their surplus value is being appropriated. I don't know what Anna thinks about this, but that's, I think, really important. And services like education and health, I agree with Anna that there's the issue of privatisation, which is buying and selling those services in a commodifying them. But there's also that traditional understanding of services too. But anyway, that's all.
The thing I could add to that is that while teachers in public schools, for example, are not being exploited in the same way, they are being proletarianized in another sense, in the way in which they have to fight now for their terms and conditions of employment. Whereas when I began teaching, which is, I won't say how long ago, the whole system was very different. We had unions, but we'd put in a claim for something and there was a tribunal that just arbitrarily handed down decisions. We didn't go through all the processes that you do today. The whole scene has been changed. So we're put more on a footing that the working class is on, but we're not technically exploited in Marxist terms. The government, in fact, is funding us. It's not making a profit out of us. Yeah.
Can I raise some other issues now, or do you want to continue that?
No. Just hang on one second. Does anybody want, Nicole or Sylvia, do you want to? Oh, Eileen, you've got your hand up?
No, I was looking at Amador, who's been waving his hand.
Oh, I see. I'm sorry. Ahmed and then Dennis.
Sorry, Conrad. I just want to go back to that pizza and throwing out pizza whatsoever. What is the difference with throwing pizza out or the putting 2, 3, 5 tons of sugar, dropping them in the ocean, or maybe coffee as well, for the fish? What's the difference? The capitalist is after the utmost profit.
Yeah.
That's on the back of the workers, which we call it surplus value. So if the price, for instance, today, pizza is $5, then it's evening, they make it $2.50. Still the capitalist, even though put it $2.50, still gains, because the real value of that pizza is much, much, much less than what they present to the customers.
Yeah,
so whether it is pizza or rice or fish or, I don't know, sugar or anything, when they drop it out or give it away as charity to get that we are also helping the people, poor people, the needy ones, etc., make sure that they have already gained not only once, twice, 100 times more than that. And for them, it doesn't matter if they throw it out or give it to the needy or whatsoever. That's the point I wanted to bring up. The always prices, we see them, even though they give a discount, it's not the real price. It's just been, somehow presented to the people, to let it buy whatsoever. So capitalist doesn't lose. The capitalist doesn't lose. That is the point I wanted to bring up. Whatever it is, pizza or, I don't know, pineapple juice or whatsoever.
There are some, if I may, some exceptions to that. And that is the monopolies, if they've got a bit of competition, they may actually sell things at a loss to put competitors out of business, because
like milk,
they can't carry the loss.
Like milk. That's shocking.
Yeah, yep.
Comrade, if they sell that sort of product or commodity less, if they sell that one less to get rid of the rivals, which might be true, but still they don't lose because they get the money, they get the equivalent of the money from some other product.
True.
Or some other business. So they don't lose at all.
No, they don't lose out overall. They just lose money on the one product. Yeah, quite right.
Look, people, what I wanted to say is a little bit off left field, but funny for on the chat on the side here, I put 2 advertisements in the chat thing here, and it's not, they got nothing to do with what Anna's talking about, and I just wanted to treat everybody as though you didn't know how to do this, but in case, because I know there are some who know this perfectly, but if you go into the chat, you'll see the word file, and you can, if you hit file, it says oh, not file, where is it? It says save chat, where it says those three little dots. Can everyone see those 3 little dots? If you click on that, you can save everything that's in the chat. And Nicole, for example, has put in a website that you might want to visit, and I've put in a plea for people to watch the centenary video, and the fact that Port Jackson has produced some Black Lives Matters postcards, and if you want any, and you can get people to sign them, let us know and we'll send them out, send you 5 or 6 or 10, whatever you can do. But anyway, so save chat and have a look through it. If there's something that interests you, follow it up on, in your own time. But that's just, that's to the side of what Anna has been saying, but I just thought you should know that. Thanks.
All right, I'm not quite sure that we should have advertisements in the middle of discussion, but I'll forgive you, Dennis.
You can deal with him later, Hannah. He'll speak later.
But I think after, if you look at that chat, you will see a quick report. Oh, that was from Nicole. Yeah, Nicole, you missed a report. Dorothy was actually at the march as well, and gave us quite a detailed report. So we just have to find out if our own comrades are facing $1,000 fines or not. All right, now let's go back to surplus value. I just wanted to make one point about what Comrade Ahmed was saying, and that is we have to be careful about the way we present that, because it can sound as if the owners in capitalist society are sort of omniscient, that they always win out. And it is true, of course, that they have enormous economic and political power, but they also go bankrupt. And the myth that they are so efficient is a myth. There are many factors which, capitalist producers pretend that they really understand and control and can know, and don't. So capitalism is not actually always that efficient, and it's also cutthroat. So that, we see bankruptcies in small business and larger businesses all the time in capitalism. So as I say, they are not omniscient, and we can, if we can organize properly, finally defeat the bastards. They are not all powerful and all knowing by any means. So that it's a question of presentation. I'm not disagreeing with what Comrade Ahmed said, but we shouldn't create a picture that these are our masters and we will never be able to escape them.
One thing to add, Comrade, to your comment, which I appreciate. The capitalist economy is a casino economy. is based on shares. You never see them, based on things which you never see them. You buy them and you sell them. It is they call it casino economy. Those who are big fish, they get a small fish, as you said, you know. So it doesn't mean, I was talking something like Coles, something like Woolworth supermarket, comparing to the corner shop. Of course, the Woolworth and the Coles will, you know, will bankrupt these things. You're talking about one Coles drop those pizza, it doesn't lost for that one, you know. This is the main thing I was going to bring about.
No, Comrade Ahmed, I wasn't disagreeing with what you said. I was only talking about an aspect of it that we need to be careful about when discussing it.
Yeah.
Thank you, comrade. Capitalism has created its diggers, which are the proletariat, the working class. Willy-nilly, the working class will win. It's not a slogan. It's happening before. It's now in the 3-4 countries that we know, like Cuba, like China, like Vietnam, Laos, whatsoever. You know, they are existing. Hopefully in the future, we will have more.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Somebody, I think with a female voice, was beginning to speak.
I think Dorothy.
I don't know who it was.
Dorothy?
Huh?
Dorothy's got a hand up.
Sorry, yes, I've got my hand up, yes.
Well, I can't see Dorothy.
I'm not in the video because I've just washed my hair, Hannah, and I've got a towel around my head.
Oh, well, that's all right.
All right, I didn't know you had your hand up. I'm sorry. How do I know she has her hand up, Dennis? How did you?
Oh, it's in the thing.
There's a little image there.
All right.
The controller can see the image.
Oh, you're all powerful.
Oh, right. Anyway, sorry, Dorothy, keep going.
That's okay. I don't know that I have much to say. I think what you were saying is a sort of segue into what I was wanting to say as well, which is that the system, it follows certain laws, and those laws force the capitalists to chase super profits. They're constantly chasing super profits. They want profits, but they want super profits, and it's that that constant battle that Anna referred to between the worker and the boss to see who's going to get what share of the surplus value, but also super exploitation, because they are forced by the laws of capitalism to chase those profits. So what we're having is that cyclical overproduction, and that's the issue that that people were raising, I think, in terms of, well, you know, this, how do we know the real value? Because they go on sale and they sell it for $500 less. But if they're producing and not selling, then that's going to lead to a crisis. So they reduce their profit margin, their share of the surplus value, in order to avoid not getting anything, and that crisis of overproduction. All this commodities or not commodities, because they don't sell, all that what Hannah referred to as the potential in something, but it doesn't have a exchange value. And all those laws of capitalism, we can understand and we can use them to our advantage. The problem is that we need to develop that consciousness in the working class, and in not only in the working class, in academics, in different allies of the working class. We need to develop that understanding that we can use those laws, that understanding of those laws of capitalism, to know that we don't have to limit ourselves to the struggle for a bigger or lesser share of the surplus value. That's what we've done under capitalism now, what we're talking about, 200 years, for 200 years, except in some countries, like Soviet Union, for example, and the former socialist countries, they broke that cycle. Yeah. the point to understand all this, I guess, is what I'm saying is the point is that that understanding leads us to struggle not just for an increase in our share of the surplus value or our share of but also in changing the whole system. And I think if we don't make those connections, then we're doomed to this backwards, forwards seesaw of capitalism, which is reinforced by the ideological stuff about that. Look, we're losing money under COVID, therefore workers have to take less. We're sucked in by that ideological argument. Anyway, I'm starting to go on, so I will stop.
Okay. Ahmed, did you have your hand up?
I agree with Comrade Dorothy. We should not give in to the capitalists. We know that they will not leave the power willy-nilly. We have to educate the working class and at the same time educating ourselves, educate the alliance of the working class, the petty bourgeoisie, farmers, peasants, so whatever we call it. We should have a stronger Communist Party, not like Trots divide and split. That will help the future generation to live peacefully, to live in equality, better than what they are now. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, any more comments from comrades?
If it's okay, Hannah.
No, go, Nicole.
I am probably not gonna word it as well, so I've put it in the chat. Just that article is really good in terms of thinking about Marxism when you're in a country that has benefited off colonialism. So that's a really good article. And in terms of speaking about, I guess, cycles that we have, especially during COVID, I know it's more getting into like philosophy, but if you just Google like Hegel, there's some really good conversations about how capital can create agendas and then propositions, which are things that create the need for that agenda to be enforced. So just some discussions and some things to think about after. Sorry.
Okay, can everyone access the Zoom chat?
Yeah.
Good.
You know how to save it.
And Dennis has told you how to save it. So there are a couple of references that Nicole has left for us. You might want to follow up and read something.
I've accessed the three dots. I know they have a special name, but I don't get any of that save chat stuff. I just get chat one, and I just see 3 comments. So no, I can't. I don't know what Dennis was referring to.
Dorothy, at the bottom of your screen,
Bottom?
At the bottom of the screen, do you have something which says more?
No, that's at the top of my screen.
And that doesn't bring up the group chat?
It brings up chat, and it just has 3 comments. Mine, maybe it's because I lost power in the middle of this session and it's just wiped them out. That's okay. Don't worry. It's probably because I lost power in the middle and I was disconnected. And it's
I'll save it for you and I'll send it to you, Dorothy.
All right. Okay. Thanks, Dennis.
All right. I think I kind of have the impression that now we're sort of sharing resources and so on. We've actually finished the discussion. No more questions or comments from anybody? I don't want to stop anyone speaking if they want to.
Can I just make a ridiculous comment about Gina Rinehart? Acme will like this one.
in 2012, she suggested that all Australian workers should work for $2 a day, because that's what workers were working for overseas. This is the woman with all the wealth of the Hancock Industries behind her. Yeah, I just want, it's just a bit of light relief.
Yeah.
Her head is,
Jenny,
Marx wouldn't like it.
Anna.
Yeah, just on the Hancocks while we're at it. Her father, who did a lot of damage to Aboriginal people, quite a number of people died in the process of his mines and other activities. And I remember hearing, reading a comment way back when he was doing it all, that those lives, well, that's just a price you pay for progress. Shrugging it off, the deaths.
Yeah.
Really nasty piece of
Totally
work.
believable.
And she's no better. And
No.
I love the fight going on between her children, her over the money. Couldn't happen to a nicer person.
It's good, isn't it?
Can't spare a cent, and she's got 20 billion plus.
Yeah, that's right.
If I can just go back to references, that quote about the struggle and the need for the revolutionary struggle, not just demands within capitalism, that's from Wages, Price and Profit, which is a good little booklet. And if any comrades are interested in other reading to get a better understanding of all of this, I can send Dennis a reading list for him to mail out to you if you would like me to.
Anna, thank you. I think that will be useful. I know that sort of people on the Hook Up a Party and non-party will have more experience.
You don't want, you said you didn't want
or less experience.
You sure?
So they can pick and choose.
Yep. And finally, if I can just sort of conclude, as I said at the beginning, this would only be a brief introduction. It couldn't go into depth. And there are a lot of issues that comrades have raised in the discussion which are important. And there's others such as capitalism now, imperialism now is in many respects very different to how it was in the time of Marx. Exploitation hasn't gone away or changed, but some of the forms, the structure of companies, capitalists, it's no longer someone employing a couple of people to make shoes or something like, sort of illustrations in Marx's work. You've got very complex company structures. The shareholders, if you look at the top 200 companies on the Australian stock market, then you no longer see names of the top 20 shareholders listed in company reports. You see financial institutions named. And there's a handful of institutions which have the largest holdings in the top 5 or 10 companies in Australia. So the wealth is highly concentrated, highly centralised, and we have no idea who really owns it, because these institutions manage it for other people, and some superannuation funds appear in these lists too. So whereas in, I think, the 1960s or whenever it was, the old Communist Party put out a publication, The 60 Families Who Own Australia. We can't do that anymore, except maybe for a couple, So there's a lot of changes taken place with the development of imperialism, but capitalism still remains capitalism. That's not changed. And exploitation still remains exploitation. So I'll stop there. Thank you.
I think that's a good reminder to us all. Despite the complexities, that's what it's about. We're dealing with capitalism and exploitation, and those are what we have to overcome. Anna, thank you very much for leading a very interesting discussion. Sometimes these discussions online are a bit difficult, but I thought this one went along some very interesting lines. And thank you so much for taking the time to do that for us. Thank you to everybody who took part. Dennis will save the chat with the references that Nicole's put in and send that to Dorothy. If anybody else wants that, let him know.
I'll send it.
Or well, maybe just send it to everyone.
Yeah.
Along with the other stuff, and then what people want they can keep, and what they don't want they can just delete. And the next talk in 2 weeks' time is on the US Marines in Darwin and the role they're playing. If you have any topics you would like us to bring up in these talks, let me know and I'll try and find speakers for the program. And lastly, whoops, I'm just going up the chat. Don't forget the postcards from our branch about Black Lives Matter. So if you can take some postcards, get in touch with us at port.jackson@cpa.org.au or email me or Dennis and say, I'd like some postcards, you know, I'll post one and I'll give some to friends to post. So get involved in that campaign if you can, please. I think that's all for today, except thank you for your participation. Stay safe, stay healthy, and hopefully we'll all meet again in 2 weeks' time. Okay, comrades, bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks.